Hey, it's John and Mike from brew-dudes.com. What are we talking about tonight?
We're talking about old yeast. So here's the sitch. So I have this braggot which I used wine yeast on, D47. So it's mostly honey, but with a little bit of beer in it. I guess it was wort that I added into it with some hops. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great if I used Nelson Sauvin hops that are supposed to be like white wine with a white wine yeast and with some Pilsner malt? Wouldn't that be beautiful? So I fermented that and I let it sit and condition for a few months, knowing that the yeast would probably go off to sleep and wouldn't be around for bottle conditioning.
This is all still in primary.
This is like secondary. I actually transferred it to a different vessel.
Okay.
And knowing the issues I had with my braggot I did last year, where I thought I would have enough yeast to bottle condition, and nothing happened, and I actually had to do a yeast inoculation with champagne yeast to get it to.
Was that the syringe inoculation?
Yep, the syringe inoculation. I thought to myself, well, at bottling, I'll just add a little bit of yeast.
Yep.
Well, I start reading up on D47 yeast being a killer yeast.
Killer yeast strain.
So yes, that I didn't even know about, because I don't think beer yeast strains have this situation where they actually produce a protein that kills other yeast strains.
I think some of the weirder Brett strains are like that.
They are too?
Just because they're rumored to have come from wine strains in certain aspects.
I see.
Of course, we're going to get 20 comments that say, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And we welcome those comments.
Yeah. So
continue.
So I did some research into it and saw that that D47 was one of these yeast types that, if I added, say, the new bottle conditioning yeast CBC1, which is what I wanted to use, it may not ferment the priming sugar that I would add to it for the bottle conditioning. So I went to my stash. I had some other white wine yeast that had a best buy date of sometime in January of 2014, and said, what am I going to do with this? Is this yeast too old? So that's the question. How old is too old for yeast?
So you have some still commercially packaged white wine yeast.
Yep, dry.
That you want to pitch.
Yep, I don't know
to rescue a braggot.
Well, I have.
Okay.
Let's just put it that way. I have.
Okay, you have. And you're wondering whether or not it's going to make it.
Is it viable?
Is it viable?
Yep.
So
How old is too old, Michael?
Well, the packet usually has some stamped on there somewhere a manufacturer or best by date on there. But being dry yeast, even if you've had it for a year, I bet you're probably close to, depending on how old it was when you got it, which, but you're probably close. Did you proof it at all?
Of course.
Did you proof it with a little sugar?
No.
Just because if you put a little sugar in there, just to see if it foams up, then you know it's active. Yep. Right?
Well, it foamed up anyway.
Yeah, it's foaming because it's rehydrating and stuff, but eventually that foam will settle back down. Or if you do put some sugar in there, you'll get like the yeasty foam just from it rehydrating.
I see.
But then you'll get foam. I mean, it'll fill up and foam over.
Okay, so that's actually a good tip.
Yeah. Okay, write that one down. Write that one down. So, but I bet, a year into it, you're probably okay. I mean, dry yeast has got a really long shelf life. Its viability doesn't drop off nearly as fast as liquid yeast does, because it's under very different
stress
conditions.
So I think my answer to that question is, how old is too old for yeast? Is you have to create a starter for it and see how it reacts, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's the same thing as the packs that I got that were frozen. I got Y yeast packets that came and it had ice crystals in it for sure.
But to verify with a starter, you're actually, because you don't have a stir plate, right?
No, I don't.
Because on a stir plate, when you're doing yeast starter on a stir plate, it's constantly moving, and you actually really don't see activity, because it really doesn't foam up much at all. Like when you do a static starter that you shake occasionally, right? You do get a little bit of a krausen, right? So you can tell that there's activity.
Yeah.
I rarely see that there's activity in my stuff. I mean, really, I've actually gauged by eye the color of the starter, and then as the yeast multiply, the color gets lighter in color, because there's more yeast, there's more light reflecting back at you when you look at it. So that it gets more milky is what it looks like in a starter. But so anyway, those are two valid points. But if you could have even pitched most of your proofed yeast, and then on the side, reserved a tablespoon of it and put that in some sugar water, just to see if it started to foam up. That would have told you that you had some viable yeast.
How
in there
long
too.
does that take, though?
20 minutes, less
What,
than
really?
that. Yeah, no, it'll go. It'll go pretty fast.
Okay, well that's
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
a very good tip.
At least experiments I've done in a laboratory setting with yeast, like that type of thing. Yeah, it'll
doesn't take
start.
that long.
Once if it's alive and viable, it's alive and viable. It'll start making gas and make a foamy
Oh, well,
thing.
that's good to know.
So,
Okay.
um,
So do you think the answer to my question is how old is too old? Really, well, create some kind of starter, give
Yeah.
it some kind of food to see if it reacts?
yeah, I think that my answer to all questions like this is
Yes.
try it.
Okay.
Because home brewing shouldn't be about coming up with the best plans, the best ingredients, the best whatever, and think I'm going to get the best result.
Yeah.
Because there's still process, there's still other factors, that unforeseen factors that come in occasionally. And so the only way to really get better at knowing the answers to questions like these is to try
Try
them,
it
is
and
to
see what
experiment. So
happens.
you've got the experiment going right now.
Yep.
And when we taste that braggot at some point, we'll be able to say, hey, guess what? This year-old dry yeast strain
Wasn't good.
Wasn't good, or maybe it
And I'm
was
back
good.
to inoculating with a syringe.
Yeah,
That's what's going to happen.
sound good. So this really was a wine yeast question.
It was a wine yeast question, but it does apply to beer yeast because I had yeast that are frozen. I've
okay.
had yeast that have sat
Yeah.
in my fridge for a year or so, and I'm not really sure
All
if
right.
it's still
Well, not to
viable.
draw the video out longer than it needs to be, but I'm sure some people will ask, well, what if I've got yeast that I collected from a primary ferment of a standard brown ale or a pale ale? How long can I keep a flask
I
of
don't
that
know.
yeast around?
Try it.
Yeah, try. Hey, you're catching on. You're learning something. Everybody learns
Yay.
today. Everybody learns today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have some mason jars of a blend of Saison yeast and Brett.
You should pull that out.
I should pull that out.
Nah, not right
And that's definitely a year old. We did.
Yeah.
I used that in the Big
Do you
Brew
think
last year.
So what's going to happen?
I'm gonna put that in a starter.
Yeah.
Just to revive it.
Yeah.
And pitch it into a Saison. I want to do that this year. And I also have some WLP 013, which is English dry yeast, that is really pushing like a year and a half old, but it's been sitting under a head of beer still. I'm going to put that in a starter just to see if it comes to life. I might not put it in a beer because that's probably pushing the limits. That one's
see.
almost 2 years old. But if it comes back to life, maybe I'd step it up a couple times, get a better culture, see what happens. It'd be a good experiment. I mean, so that's the point.
Try it.
Try it. There aren't really answers to these questions until you've done stuff over and over again, and with reproducibility and repeatability, then you have the answer.
Oh, you're talking like a biochemist.
I'm
again.
talking like a biochemist.
For John and Mike, brew-dudes.com. Brew on.
Cheers.